Have you ever wondered what it truly means to be lost? Not misplaced for a day or turned around on a familiar road, but to be severed from everything you know, your home, your family, your very name, for 10 long years. To wander a world that seems designed to keep you from ever finding your way back. Imagine the weight of that journey, the salt-crusted deck of a ship beneath your feet, the horizon an unbroken line of blue, and every new landfall not a promise of rest, but a riddle that could cost you your life or your soul. This is not a story of conquest, but of endurance, a story where the greatest enemy is not a monster, but the slow, grinding erosion of hope. We know this tale as the Odyssey, a masterpiece of poetry that has echoed for nearly 3,000 years. But beneath the epic verse of gods and sirens lies a deeper, more human question. What does a hero do when the war is over and the only battle left is the one to get back home? It is this voyage we are tracing today, the long, winding path of Odysseus. We will follow him from the smouldering ruins of Troy across a sea charted by both sailors and storytellers to the final, quiet moment of return. We will walk the line between the world Homer sang of and the Bronze Age reality that may have inspired him, between archaeological evidence and powerful legend. Welcome, traveler. Welcome to Lanterns of Time. I'm glad you've joined us for this journey. If you'd like, feel free to share where in the world you're listening from. It's always a pleasure to see how far our community stretches. And if you'd like this lantern to guide you on future explorations, you can subscribe to keep it close. Now, let us set our course for the Aegean Sea, in the shadow of a fallen city. The air is thick with smoke and the distant cries of victory. One man, known for his cunning, looks not toward the spoils but westward, across the endless water. For him, the hardest part is just beginning. The sea is a color of cold iron, and the air tastes of salt and smoke. Behind Odysseus's 12 ships, the coast of Troy still glows faintly, a smudge of orange embers on the horizon. The 10-year war is over, but the journey home has just begun. For 9 days, the wind carries them north and west, past familiar headlands and into waters where the world feels suddenly larger, emptier, and more uncertain. On the 10th day, a low coastline emerges from the morning haze. It is the land of the Cicones, allies of the Trojans. To the men weary from rowing and hollow from years of siege, it looks like opportunity. The memory of victory is still a fever in their blood. They have spent a decade perfecting the art of the raid, the swift landing, the coordinated assault, the gathering of plunder. Archaeology confirms that Mycenaean warlords operated this way, their palatial economies sustained by such expeditions. So when Odysseus gives the order, the ships turn toward the shore. It is not a strategic decision. It is a reflex born of a lifetime of war. They take the main town, Ismarus, with brutal efficiency. The Cicones are unprepared, their warriors scattered in the fields. The Greeks swarm through the streets, breaking down doors, dragging out stores of wine and grain, and herding terrified families into the central square. The air fills with the sounds of a different kind of battle, the smash of pottery, the lowing of cattle, the cries of the defeated. Odysseus, Homer tells us, urged his men to leave quickly. But the lure of the spoils was too strong. The crews fell upon the Cicones' dark, sweet wine, drinking directly from the storage jars until the courtyard ran with purple streams. They celebrated as if the war had never ended, as if the next dawn would not come. It did come, and with it came the Cicones from the hinterlands. They had rallied their neighbors, and now they swept down from the hills at first light, a tide of chariots and shouting men. The battle that followed was a chaotic, desperate affair. The Greeks, heavy with wine and exhaustion, fought in scattered groups along the beach. Men who had survived the walls of Troy fell on unfamiliar sand, cut down by javelins they never saw coming. For each ship's crew, the order was the same: retreat, cut the anchor lines, push back into the surf. When the last oars bit into the water and the shore began to recede, the cost was counted. 6 men from each ship were lost. 72 lives, exchanged for wine and pride. The wind that now fills their sails feels different, colder, carrying the scent of their own failure. This first stop on the long voyage home is a lesson written in blood. It shows how the habits of war can poison peace. The Mycenaean code of Xenia, the sacred bond of hospitality between host and guest, had been shattered the moment they attacked a people who were not at war with them. They had become raiders, not heroes returning home. And the sea, which had been their road, now became their judge. As they row away from the Cicone's coast, a dark bank of cloud gathers on the northern horizon. The storm that hits them is not merely weather. It is the first answer to their recklessness. For 9 days and nights, the fleet is driven south, completely lost, until the wind finally tears itself to shreds and leaves them in a strange, calm bay. The shore here is gentle, with pale sand and low, flowering shrubs. The men stagger onto the beach, grateful for solid ground. They do not know it yet, but they have arrived at the next test. The memory of Ismarus, the taste of stolen wine, the screams at dawn, is still fresh, but ahead lies a danger of a subtler kind, a place where the desire to forget can be more fatal than any sword. The storm that drove Odysseus away from the blood-soaked shores of Ismarus finally begins to lose its fury. For 9 relentless days, his fleet has been tossed across an unfamiliar sea, each of the 12 battered ships separated at times by towering waves before finding one another again in the shifting winds. When the skies finally clear, the exhausted sailors discover a sheltered bay unlike any they have seen before. The water is impossibly calm. It lies before them like polished glass, reflecting a pale blue sky untouched by storm. A gentle breeze carries the scent of salt, mingled with an unfamiliar sweetness drifting from the land beyond. After days of darkness, roaring seas, and the bitter memory of defeat, the tranquil shore feels almost unreal. The beach slopes gently toward low hills blanketed in soft grey-green plants. There are no city walls, no watchtowers, no cultivated fields stretching into the distance. No sound of blacksmiths or shepherds. Only insects humming lazily beneath the afternoon sun and leaves whispering in the breeze. For men who have known nothing but war, silence itself becomes a temptation. Odysseus remains cautious. The disaster at Ismarus is still fresh in his mind. Victory had turned to catastrophe because discipline had given way to greed. He has no intention of repeating that mistake. He selects 3 trusted companions to explore the island, while the rest of the fleet remains anchored offshore. Sailors repair torn rigging, refill water jars, and tend to the wounded while every eye follows the small scouting party disappearing beyond the dunes. Time passes peacefully, too peacefully. When the scouts finally return, there is no urgency in their steps. Instead, they smile. Their weapons hang loosely at their sides. Their faces, so recently hardened by grief, are strangely serene. One carries several pale fruits, offering them freely to the waiting sailors. "The people here welcomed us," one murmurs dreamily. "They offered us these. There is no need to hurry anymore." The fruit is unlike anything they have tasted before, soft, fragrant, almost impossibly sweet. Those who sample it find an extraordinary calm spreading through both mind and body. the ache of blistered hands disappears. The sorrow for fallen companions fades. Even the memory of Ithaca begins to soften. The island's inhabitants, whom Homer simply calls the Lotus-Eaters, offer no threats and demand nothing in return. They neither imprison strangers nor raise weapons against them. They simply live in quiet contentment, sustained by the mysterious lotus that frees them from longing itself. That is precisely what makes them so dangerous. Unlike the Cicones who attacked with spears, or the monsters still waiting somewhere beyond the horizon, the Lotus-Eaters conquer without violence. They erase purpose. The scouts soon declare they no longer wish to leave. Why continue suffering across unknown seas? Why chase a home remembered only through pain? Why not remain forever where every burden quietly melts away? Odysseus immediately understands the true nature of the danger. A warrior can fight an enemy. A sailor can survive a storm. But how does one defeat the desire to simply stop caring? Without hesitation, he orders the affected men seized by force. They struggle, not with anger, but with heartbreaking reluctance, pleading to remain among the lotus fields where every worry has dissolved into gentle peace. Ignoring their cries, Odysseus has them carried back aboard their ships. Some must even be bound securely to the rowing benches until the strange enchantment begins to fade. His crew watches in uneasy silence as the fleet pushes away from the welcoming shore. Behind them, the island slowly disappears beneath the afternoon haze, carrying with it the scent of sweet blossoms and effortless contentment. Whether Homer intended the lotus to represent a real plant remains uncertain. Ancient Egypt knew the blue lotus, a flower associated with altered consciousness and ritual symbolism. Others have suggested the jujube fruit or entirely forgotten Mediterranean plants that later became transformed through oral tradition. Archaeology cannot identify Homer's lotus with certainty. Perhaps that is beside the point. The island represents something every generation understands. After enough hardship, forgetting can become more attractive than enduring. For Odysseus, leadership means remembering when everyone else wishes to forget. The men who tasted the lotus slowly recover over the following days. Memory returns first in fragments. The rhythm of the oars, the names of fallen friends, the distant outline of Ithaca carried only in imagination. Along with memory comes grief, responsibility, and longing. None of them welcome its return. Yet without those burdens, there could be no homecoming. The fleet sails onward into unfamiliar waters, 12 ships once again moving together beneath a widening sky. Days later, a rugged coastline rises from the sea. Dark cliffs overlook a sheltered harbor. Beyond them stands a solitary cave. Outside rests an enormous stone enclosure filled with sheep and goats, its walls built from boulders so immense that no ordinary man could possibly have lifted them. The sailors exchange uneasy glances. After an island where danger wore the face of peace, they are about to discover another where danger has taken physical form. And this time, no sweetness waits beyond the shore. The ship moves slowly now, the men still glancing back at the horizon where the land of the Lotus-Eaters had faded into haze. They are quiet, the memory of that sweet forgetting fruit a new kind of fear in their minds. The sea offers no comfort, only a wide, empty blue that seems to lead nowhere. For days they see nothing but water and sky. Then on the 10th morning a smudge of land appears, not a gentle bay, but a rugged coastline of dark cliffs. As they draw nearer, they see smoke rising from inland, thin plumes against the pale sky, and on the shore a curiosity, a high cave mouth, broad and dark, set above a natural harbor so perfect it looks carved by a god. But there are no ships, no walls, no signs of cultivation. Only a great stone slab leaning against the cave entrance and the smell of sheep carried on the wind. Odysseus chooses 12 men to go ashore with him. They take a skin of strong wine, a gift from Maron the priest back in Ismarus, a wine so dark and potent it is normally mixed with 20 parts water. He thinks it may serve as a token of friendship, or perhaps a bribe, for whoever lives in such a place. The rest of the crew remain with the ship, anchored warily in the bay. The climb to the cave is steep, over broken rock and time. Inside, the space is vast, cool, and surprisingly orderly. Cheese curds drain in woven baskets. Pails of whey stand in rows, and along the walls pens hold lambs and kids, separated by age. It is the storehouse of a prosperous herdsman, but on a scale that feels unsettling. The fire pit in the center is large enough to roast an ox. The milking stools are not stools at all, but sections of tree trunk. The men exchange glances. The shepherd of this flock is clearly no ordinary man. The evidence for what happens next comes entirely from Homer's song. Archaeology gives us no direct record of a one-eyed giant, of course, but it does offer a possible inspiration, one that later Greeks would point to themselves. If you travel to the heart of the old Mycenaean world, to sites like Mycenae or Sirens, you will see walls built of massive, irregular boulders, fitted together without mortar. Later generations, who could not imagine how their ancestors moved such stones, called them Cyclopean walls, believing only a race of giants, the Cyclops, could have built them. The connection is speculative, but it is a persistent one, that the legend of Polyphemus grew in part from the awe those Bronze Age ruins inspired in later centuries. The ground of history here is indeed soft, but the memory is vivid. They have barely begun to explore the cave when the earth begins to shake. A shadow falls across the entrance, blocking the light. The men scramble back, pressing themselves against the pens. Into the cave lumbers a figure of impossible size, a giant with a single round eye set in the middle of his forehead. He drives his flock before him, ewes and rams, and with a grunt he heaves the great stone door into place, sealing them inside. The sound is final, like the closing of a tomb. He bends to his chores, milking the sheep into troughs, lighting a fire. Only then does he turn his single eye toward the shadows where the Greeks hide. His voice, when he speaks, is like rocks grinding together. He asks who they are and whether they are pirates. Odysseus, his heart pounding, steps forward. He speaks of being blown off course, of supplicating the master of this house in the name of Zeus, the protector of guests. The giant's answer is a roar of contempt. He cares nothing for Zeus or the laws of hospitality. He is Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, and his law is his own strength. And with that he reaches down, snatches up 2 of the men, dashes their heads against the stone floor, and tears them apart for his supper. He eats them raw, crunching bone, while his victims' comrades watch, paralyzed with horror. In the grim darkness that follows, Odysseus realizes brute force is impossible. Their swords are pins against that hide. Their only hope is metis, cunning, the very quality for which he was known. As the giant sleeps, gorged and snoring, Odysseus conceives a plan. In the cave is a great olive wood stake, green and thick as a ship's mast, which Polyphemus had been shaping for a staff. Odysseus orders his men to sharpen one end and harden it in the fire. Then they wait. The next evening, after the giant has again fed on 2 more of the crew, Odysseus approaches him with the skin of wine. He offers it as a gift. Polyphemus drinks it down in 3 great gulps, unmixed, and demands more. The strong wine goes quickly to his head. He grows talkative, asking the man's name. Odysseus, the master of deception, tells him, My name is Nobody. That is what my mother and father call me, and all my friends." The giant, now drunkenly merry, promises a gift in return. He will eat Nobody last of all. Then he collapses into a stupor. This is the moment. Odysseus heats the point of the stake in the embers until it glows. With his men holding it steady, he drives it deep into the giant's single eye, twisting it like a shipwright boring a hole. The sizzle of burning flesh fills the cave. The giant's scream is a sound of pure, world-breaking agony. He wrenches the stake out, blinding and mad with pain, and staggers around the cave, bellowing for help. From across the mountains, other Cyclopes hear the commotion. They call to Polyphemus, asking if someone is stealing his sheep or trying to kill him. And the giant, in his torment, shouts back the perfect, tragic answer: "Nobody is killing me! Nobody is tricking me!" His neighbors, annoyed, tell him to pray to his father Poseidon if he's sick, and leave him to his misery. The trap of the name has sprung shut. Morning comes. Blinded, Polyphemus rolls away the stone door to let his flock out, but he sits in the entrance, feeling each animal as it passes to ensure the men do not escape. Here, Odysseus's cunning finds one final layer. He has his surviving men cling to the undersides of the rams, the largest in the flock, so that as the animals pass, the giant's hands only brush their woolly backs. Odysseus himself clings to the belly of the mightiest ram. One by one they pass out of the cave into the sharp, clean air of freedom. Once they reach the ship and push off, Odysseus cannot resist a final boast. As they row frantically for the open sea, he calls back to the shore, shouting his true name and lineage: Odysseus, son of Laertes, sacker of cities, the one who blinded Polyphemus. It is a needless, fatal flourish. The giant, hearing this, lifts his hands to the sky and prays to his father, Poseidon, god of the sea. He asks that if Odysseus is truly destined to reach his home, let it be after great suffering, alone on a stranger's ship, and let him find trouble waiting there. It is a curse that will shape every wave and storm to come. The crew rows until their arms burn, leaving the island of the Cyclopes behind. They are fewer now and quieter, their victory soured by the cost and by the dread of the god's anger now hanging over them. They have survived through wit, not strength, but in doing so they have made an enemy of the ocean itself. The wind, which had been calm, begins to stir. Clouds gather on the horizon, dark and heavy. The sea, so long a blank highway, now feels like a living thing, watching them, waiting. Odysseus stands at the prow, looking not at the way ahead, but at the sky, knowing that the greatest test of his voyage has just begun, and it will not be a monster in a cave, but the endless patient wrath of a god. The open water before them is no longer empty. It is filled with the echo of a prayer and the first cold breath of a coming storm. The sea, after the blinding of Polyphemus, is a different kind of enemy. It is no longer the indifferent rolling plain that carried them from Troy. Now it feels personal. Every wave that crashes against the hull seems to carry a voice, a deep, resonant growl of anger. The sky churns with unnatural speed, clouds racing as if pulled by an invisible hand. This is the wrath of Poseidon made manifest, a divine punishment for the injury done to his son. The single surviving ship, a speck of wood and linen on a vast, furious canvas, is driven not by any course Odysseus can set, but by the god's relentless will. For days they are prisoners of the storm. The men bail water until their arms ache, their faces raw from salt and wind. Sleep is impossible. The world is a cacophony of creaking timbers, snapping sails, and the roar of water. They eat cold, soaked barley cakes, their thoughts fixed only on survival, on the next wave, the next breath. The horizon is a wall of grey, offering no landmark, no hope of respite. Then, on the 9th day, the violence simply ceases. The wind drops to a whisper. The waves settle into a gentle, oily swell. And through a parting veil of mist, an island appears. It is not like the rugged, wild shores they have known. This place is ordered, serene. Low, grassy hills rise from a calm bay, and upon the highest hill stands a palace of polished stone. Smoke rises from its chimneys in straight, thin columns, undisturbed by any breeze. The air here is still and sweet, smelling of thyme and warm earth. It feels like a dream of peace after a long fever. This, Homer tells us, is the floating island of Aeolia, home of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. In the epic, he is a mortal king favored by the gods, entrusted with the care of the tempests, which he keeps imprisoned in a deep cavern or, in some versions, bound within a great ox-hide bag. The scene that unfolds is one of the most psychologically acute in the entire voyage. Aeolus, a gracious host, welcomes the battered crew. For a full month they feast and recover their strength, listening to the king's tales. He asks Odysseus about the fall of Troy, about the war, about the long journey. And Odysseus in turn tells him of their suffering, of their desperate desire to reach home. Moved by their story, Aeolus decides to help. He gives Odysseus a gift, a giant bag, made from the hide of a 9-year-old ox, tightly bound with a silver cord. Inside, the poet says, he has confined all the winds that blow across the earth, save one, the gentle west-northwest zephyr, which is left free to carry them straight to the shores of Ithaca. The symbolism is potent and purely literary. The evidence for this episode, as the confidence map makes clear, is non-existent. This is not a fragment of Mycenaean memory or a sailor's tale of a real place. This is Homer's narrative genius at work, crafting a parable about trust, temptation, and the fragility of hope. The wind bag is a perfect story device, a tangible representation of fortune itself, a sealed container of potential disaster that promises safe passage if left alone. For 9 days and 9 nights, the zephyr blows true. The coast of Ithaca rises on the horizon, so close that the men can see the watchfires burning on the beaches. They can almost smell the familiar scent of their own hills. Exhaustion and relief wash over them. They have done it. They have outrun the curse. And in that moment of triumphant anticipation, as Odysseus finally allows himself to sleep, human nature intervenes. The crew has been watching the bulging leather bag for days. What treasure, they whisper to each other. Could their captain be hoarding? Gold from Aeolus? Silver? The spoils he intends to keep for himself alone? The logic of greed, born of years of hardship and loss, overrides all else. They believe they have been betrayed. As Odysseus sleeps, they creep to the bag and loosen the silver cord. The result is catastrophic. The imprisoned winds explode outward with the force of a thunderclap. In an instant, the calm sea becomes a maelstrom. The friendly zephyr is swallowed by a screaming riot of gales from every corner of the compass. The ship is spun like a leaf, torn away from the receding shore of Ithaca and hurled back out into the open ocean. When Odysseus awakes, it is to the sound of his men's wails and the sight of the lost homeland vanishing once more behind a curtain of spray. They are driven back to Aeolia, but there is no welcome this time. The king's face is dark with disgust. "Away from this island," he cries, seeing the bag lying empty and slack. "You are clearly hated by the immortal gods. I cannot help one whom the gods despise." The hospitality, the gift, the trust, all are irrevocably broken. The crew's mistrust has not only shattered their one chance at a quick return, it has made them outcasts, unworthy of even the most basic aid. The ship is pushed from the harbor, and the winds, now truly masterless, take them. The episode of Iolus serves as a brutal lesson. After monsters and gods, the greatest danger Odysseus faces comes from within his own ship. It is a failure of faith, a collapse of the discipline that holds a crew together. The winds in the bag were a metaphor for controlled fortune. Their release is the chaos that follows when human suspicion triumphs over loyalty. Homer shows us that the path home can be lost not only to a giant's curse, but to a whispered doubt, a loosened knot, a moment of weak faith. The sea, once again, is their only companion. But now it carries them toward a darkness of a different kind, a place where the cliffs are impossibly high, the harbors are death traps, and the inhabitants are not solitary giants, but an entire race of destruction. The winds, now free and malicious, steer them unerringly toward the land of the Laestrygonians. The winds that carried Odysseus away from Aeolia seemed determined to erase every trace of hope. For days, the 12 surviving ships wandered without direction, scattered at times by contrary gusts, before gradually finding one another again upon the empty sea. No familiar stars guided them. No coastline offered reassurance. Even the most experienced helmsman had long since lost any certainty of where they sailed. Then, one morning, towering cliffs emerged from the mist. Dark walls of stone rose almost vertically from the sea, enclosing what appeared to be a perfectly sheltered harbor. The entrance was narrow, but once inside, the water lay astonishingly calm, protected from every wind. After weeks of storms and uncertainty, it seemed like a gift from the gods. Most of the captains eagerly steered their vessels into the harbor. Odysseus did not. Years of war had taught him to distrust places that appeared too perfect. Instead of entering fully, he ordered his own ship to remain just outside the narrow entrance, fastening its mooring line to a rocky outcrop where the crew could quickly cut themselves free if danger appeared. It would prove to be the decision that saved every life still aboard his vessel. As was his custom, Odysseus sent 3 trusted men to explore the strange land. The scouts followed a winding path that climbed steeply from the harbor until they encountered a young woman carrying water from a spring. Calmly, she directed them toward the great house of her father, King Antiphates. The silence that followed their arrival was brief. Antiphates was no ordinary king. He was a giant. Without question or warning, he seized one of the scouts and killed him on the spot. The remaining 2 fled downhill as an enormous cry echoed across the valley. It was not an alarm, it was a hunting call. From every ridge surrounding the harbor, giants began to appear. Hundreds of them. The harbor that moments earlier had seemed a sanctuary suddenly revealed its true nature. High cliffs surrounded the anchored ships on every side, leaving almost no room to maneuver. The Laestrygonians did not need ships of their own. Gravity itself became their weapon. Massive boulders thundered down from the heights. The first crushed a ship completely, snapping its mast like dry reeds. The second smashed another against the cliff wall. Then dozens more followed. Wood exploded into splinters, bronze fittings shattered. Men were thrown into the water before they even understood what was happening. Those who attempted to swim toward open sea found themselves trapped within the narrow harbor. The giants lined the cliffs above, hurling rocks and thrusting enormous spears downward as though harvesting fish from a pond. The slaughter lasted only moments. From outside the harbor entrance, Odysseus watched the disaster unfold with growing horror. There was no battle to fight. No formation to hold, no clever trick to devise, only one command remained. Cut the line! His crew slashed through the mooring rope with a single stroke. Every man threw his weight upon the oars. The ship surged backward, scraping past jagged rocks as another avalanche of stone crashed into the harbour behind them. One final boulder struck the water only yards from the stern, sending a wave over the deck that nearly overturned the vessel. Yet momentum carried them beyond the narrow entrance, out into open sea, where the giants could no longer reach them. Behind them, the harbour became strangely quiet. Broken timbers floated upon dark water. Fragments of sails drifted between shattered hulls. The cries of drowning sailors gradually faded until only the wind remained. The voyage that had left Troy with 12 ships now continued with only one. The loss transformed everything. Until this moment, Odysseus had remained the commander of a fleet. Now he was merely the captain of a single surviving vessel. The hundreds of warriors who had fought beside him beneath the walls of Troy were gone. Every future danger would be faced by the same small company of exhausted survivors. Unlike Polyphemus, whose defeat had depended upon intelligence, the Laestrygonians offered no puzzle to solve and no weakness to exploit. Their episode exists almost entirely to strip Odysseus of his remaining strength. Whether inspired by exaggerated tales of hostile coastal peoples or simply by sailors' nightmares of entering unfamiliar harbors, the story reflects one timeless truth of seafaring. Sometimes the deadliest mistake is choosing the wrong place to anchor. The surviving crew rowed in silence. No victory songs followed them now. No dreams of easy homecoming remained. The sea stretched empty before them once again, carrying a single battered ship toward yet another unknown shore. Days later, through the morning mist, they saw smoke rising gently above a wooded island. Its forests looked peaceful. Its sheltered bay seemed welcoming. None of them yet knew the woman who waited there would transform men into beasts, or that she would become one of the most important guides of Odysseus's entire journey. The single ship moves through a quieter sea, a vessel of grief and splintered wood. The men at the oars pull without speaking, their faces turned from the water, as if afraid of what they might see reflected there. The memory of the Laestrygonian harbour, the screams, the sound of ships cracking against stone, hangs over them like a shroud. For days they drift, carried by currents that seem to have forgotten their purpose. Then, through the morning mist, an island appears. It is not a place of cliffs or howling winds, but of low wooded hills sloping gently to a sheltered bay. Smoke rises in a thin, steady column from deep within a forest of oak and pine. The scent of cedar and something sweeter, like burning sandalwood, reaches them across the water. It is the first smell in weeks that does not carry the tang of fear. Odysseus chooses a small landing party. He tells the rest to wait aboard, but the order is unnecessary. No one wishes to set foot on another unknown shore. The men who follow him move like shadows through the trees, their hands never far from their sword hilts. The forest is unnervingly silent. No birds call, no insects hum in the undergrowth. Only their own footsteps, muffled by thick moss, break the stillness. Then they hear it, a sound both beautiful and chilling. It is the clear, high song of a woman's voice, weaving through the trees, accompanied by the rhythmic thump of a loom. The path opens into a sunlit clearing, and there stands a house of polished stone, wider and fairer than any they have seen since leaving the palaces of Greece. Around it, mountain lions and wolves pad quietly, but they do not snarl or attack. They lift their heads, their eyes strangely mild, and watch the men pass as if they were merely another part of the landscape. A young man, bold and reckless, suggests they call out to the woman of the house. Another, more cautious, remembers the wolves, but curiosity and a deeper, weary longing for a roof and a warm meal wins out. They shout a greeting, The singing stops. The door of polished oak swings open, and a woman stands framed in the doorway. Homer gives us her name, Circe. She is radiant, with hair like flowing dark honey and a gown that glimmers in the dappled light. She smiles, and her voice is like the song they heard. She invites them in, all of them, to share her hospitality. Her eyes are kind. Only Odysseus hesitates. A feeling he cannot name. A pricking in his blood, a memory of an old tale heard in his youth, holds him back at the edge of the clearing. He watches as his men, their fears melting away, file into the stone house. The door closes softly behind them. Time passes, the sun moves. Odysseus waits, his unease hardening into certainty. When the silence from the house becomes unbearable, he is about to approach when the door opens again. It is not his men who emerge. Circe steps out leading a herd of swine, fat, contented pigs that grunt and root in the earth. But their eyes are not the eyes of animals. They are human eyes, filled with a desperate, knowing sorrow. They look at Odysseus, and in that look is the entire horror of their transformation. The bold young man, the cautious one, all his companions, their minds trapped inside the bodies of beasts, remembering who they were. Circe touches one with her wand, a rod of polished ivory, and it trots obediently to the sty. She has done this before. Here, the ground of Homer's tale grows deeply enchanted. The episode of Circe belongs firmly to the world of legend and archetype. Archaeological evidence offers no palaces of enchantresses, no wands of transformation. Yet the story resonates with a powerful, older logic. The witch who transforms men into beasts is a figure found in folklore across the world, an embodiment of primal fears about loss of self, about surrendering to base instinct and forgetting one's purpose. For Odysseus's crew, shattered by loss and endless wandering, the temptation to cease being men, to lay down the burden of memory and thought, must have been profound. Circe's island represents not just magic, but a psychological danger far more subtle than the Cyclops club, the seduction of oblivion. Alone and armed only with his wits, Odysseus knows he must enter the lion's den. But as he steels himself, a figure appears on the path before him. It is the god Hermes, messenger of Zeus, disguised as a young man. In this divine intervention, we see the narrative machinery of epic at work. Hermes provides the antidote, a mysterious plant called moly, with a black root and a milk-white flower. He tells Odysseus how to withstand Circe's potion and, more crucially, how to then confront her. The advice is a blend of herbal lore and strategic psychology, a god's insight into both magic and mortal courage. Odysseus approaches the house. Circe welcomes him, as she did the others, offering a golden cup mixed with her drugged wine. He drinks, but the moly protects him. When she raises her wand to strike him, he draws his sword and leaps at her, as Hermes instructed. Circe cries out, recognizing the failure of her magic and the hand of the gods in it. She sees not just a man, but the man, Odysseus of Ithaca, whose destiny is known even to her. In that moment, the dynamic shifts entirely. She invites him, truly this time, to her bed. But Odysseus, wary and guided by prophecy, sets a condition. She must first swear a mighty oath to do him no further harm, and she must restore his men to their human form. Circe agrees. With another touch of her wand and different potions, the spell is reversed. The men emerge from the stables, not as swine, but as themselves, older, wiser, and weeping with gratitude. For a full year, Odysseus and his crew remain on Circe's island. It is the first prolonged respite in their decade of voyage. They feast on unlimited meat and sweet wine. The men regain their strength and their spirits. Odysseus shares the Enchantress's bed, and she, in turn, becomes his advisor and guide. In this prolonged interlude, Homer allows his characters and his audience a breath. After the relentless trauma of cannibals and storms, we are given a season of healing, a narrative oasis where wounds can scar over. This pause is purposeful. Circe is not just a rest stop, she is a preparation. As the seasons turn, she begins to speak of the journey ahead. She tells Odysseus that he cannot simply sail home. First, he must accomplish a task that seems impossible. He must travel to the very edge of the world and descend into the house of Hades, the realm of the dead. There, he must seek the ghost of the blind prophet Tiresias of Thebes, who alone can tell him the path home. The men, when they hear of this new voyage, weep again, but now from dread. They would rather face 100 Laestrygonians than confront the silent hosts of the dead. But Circe gives precise instructions, sailing directions, rituals, warnings. She is transforming from a threat into a crucial, if mysterious, ally. When the time comes to leave, she provides a fair wind and a stocked ship. As the shoreline recedes, the island of Circe once again looks like nothing more than a wooded haven, its secret power hidden. For Odysseus, the interlude has changed him. He has faced a danger that attacked not the body, but the mind and soul. He has secured a powerful, if supernatural, ally, and he now carries a burden of knowledge more terrible than any storm. The certainty that his journey must now pass through the land of death itself. The comforts of Circe's world were real, but they were also a threshold. The path home, it seems, does not lead across the sea, but through it, down into its darkest, most silent depths. The ship turns its prow toward the setting sun, toward the ocean river that circles the world, and toward the whispering shadows that await. The year on Circe's island passes like a slow dream, measured in the ripening of grapes and the turning of seasons within a single, unchanging valley. The men have been restored, but they are different now, quieter, their laughter tinged with the memory of having been beasts. Odysseus, too, feels the weight of the days. He sits with Circe in the evenings, and she speaks of the world beyond her shores with the detached curiosity of a goddess. One evening, as the firelight paints her face in shifting gold, she tells him what he must do next. To go home, she says, he must first go to a place where no living man should ever wish to go. He must sail to the edge of the world, to the misty groves of Persephone, and there consult the ghost of the blind prophet Tiresias. Only the dead can tell him how to navigate the living seas that still lie between him and Ithaca. The instruction is chilling, but the logic, to a man of the Bronze Age, is sound. If the journey ahead is unknowable, one must seek knowledge from those who have already passed beyond all journeys. Mycenaean burial shafts, deep in the earth, were designed not just to house the dead, but to maintain a connection with them. Libation vessels found by archaeologists, their bases worn from repeated tipping, suggest rituals where the living poured offerings downward, speaking through stone to ancestors below. The ground of history here grows softer, blending Homer's epic poetry with echoes of actual practice. The journey to the underworld, as Homer describes it, is a fantastical voyage to a literal shore of ghosts. But its core, the desperate need to consult the dead in a time of crisis, may reflect a much older, deeply rooted instinct from the world Odysseus came from. So they build a new ship, felling trees from Circe's forest, and when the hull is sealed with pitch and the sail is woven, they depart. The Enchantress gives them precise, terrible directions. Sail east until the ocean itself seems to end. The wind that carries them is no natural breeze. It is a cold, steady breath that smells of damp earth and forgotten things. The sea turns the color of tarnished lead, and the sunlight grows thin and watery. There are no gulls here, no dolphins racing the bow. The only sound is the creak of the mast and the slap of waves against the hull, each one sounding hollow, as if the water beneath them is growing shallow over a vast submerged plain. After days of this bleak sailing, they see it, a coastline of grey sand, backed by bare, black poplars and towering willows that weep toward the ground. This is the grove of Persephone, the entrance to the house of Hades. The air is utterly still. Odysseus beaches the ship, and the crew steps onto the sand without a word. Following Circe's instructions, they dig a trench with their swords, a cubit in length and breadth. Around it, they pour libations to the dead. First honey and milk, then sweet wine, and finally clear water. They sprinkle white barley over the trench. Then Odysseus, his voice steady but his hands cold, prays. He promises the shades of the dead that when he reaches Ithaca, he will sacrifice his best heifer and a black ram, animals whose blood is richest and most pleasing to the departed. The response is not immediate. For a long time, there is only the sigh of the wind in the willows. Then, from the trench, a cold vapor begins to rise. It smells of mildew and old bones, and the shadows begin to gather. They are formless at first, like smoke. Then they take on the vague outlines of men and women, their features blurred as if seen through deep water. They move silently, drifting toward the trench and the promise of the sacrificial blood. A wave of primal fear grips the crew. They want to flee. Odysseus holds them there, his sword drawn, as the prophet Tiresias himself approaches, recognizable by his blind eyes and the golden staff he carries. The ghost speaks, its voice like the rustle of dry leaves. He confirms the curse of Poseidon, but offers a thread of hope. If Odysseus can restrain himself and his men when they finally reach the island of the sun, he may yet reach home. But he warns of the suitors devouring his estate and of a difficult, violent reckoning awaiting him in his own halls. Then he delivers the prophecy that will hang over the rest of the voyage. "You will return," he says, "stripped of all your companions." It is a sentence, not a prediction. The cost of home will be every man who sails with him. After Tiresias fades back into the gloom, other shades press forward. Odysseus sees the ghost of his mother, Anticlea, and learns she died of grief, longing for his return. He tries 3 times to embrace her, but his arms pass through her form like mist. The moment is one of the most human in the entire epic, a warrior reduced to a helpless son, confronted with a consequence of his long absence that no cunning can undo. He speaks with the heroes of Troy, Agamemnon, who warns him of the treachery of women, Achilles, who famously declares he would rather be a living slave than a dead king, and Ajax, who still smoulders with silent anger over the award of Achilles' armor and will not speak. These are not just eerie encounters. They are reflections. Each ghost holds up a dark mirror to Odysseus's own fate, his own regrets, his own possible end. The archaeology of Mycenaean death offers no map to this fantastical shore, but it provides a backdrop for its emotions. Deep shaft graves, like those at Mycenae itself, show a culture that invested immense wealth in sending their rulers equipped for an afterlife. The masks of beaten gold, the inlaid swords, the careful placement of vessels for food and drink, all speak of a profound need to maintain a connection, to ensure the dead were honored and perhaps could still be consulted. Homer, writing centuries later, transforms this ritual anxiety into a narrative of stunning scale. The trench Odysseus digs is a dramatic amplification of a real libation pit. The gathering shades are the poetic embodiment of that ancient fear and hope that the dead are still listening. As the last of the ghosts drink from the trench and drift away, Odysseus is left exhausted on the grey sand. The crew is pallid with fright. They have witnessed the impossible, and the prophecy they carry is a heavy, cold weight in the hold of their ship. They must sail back the way they came, back toward Circe's island for one final briefing before turning their prow toward the horrors Tiresias has hinted at. The Sirens, the twin monsters Scylla and Charybdis, and the sacred cattle of the sun. The knowledge gained here is not comforting. It is a chart of future suffering, but it is knowledge nonetheless. In the world of the Odyssey, to know your fate, however grim, is still better than to sail blind into the storm. They push the ship back into the lifeless sea. The wind, obedient to Circe's magic, catches the sail and begins to pull them away from the shore of the dead. The grey coastline recedes, the weeping willows fading into a uniform gloom. The men do not speak. They are each alone with the vision of their own end, and with the grim understanding that their captain now sails with a terrible certainty. He knows how his story ends. He knows they will not be in it. The sea ahead is no longer just water and wind. It is a path laid out by prophecy, and every wave brings them closer to the choices that will make it true. The single ship sails north from Circe's island, its hull still fragrant with the scent of the herbs she gave them. The air is clear, the sea calm, but a different kind of tension settles over the crew. They have heard the warnings. Circe described what lies ahead in precise, dreadful detail, and the memory of the underworld hangs over them like a cold mist. They know the path home is now a gauntlet of impossible choices. For the first time, Odysseus does not merely face a monster or a storm. He must choose between two horrors, and the choice itself will be a kind of sacrifice. The first danger announces itself not with roaring water or towering cliffs, but with a sudden, profound stillness. The wind dies. The waves flatten into a glassy plain. The men lower the sail, their movements quiet, listening. Then it comes, a sound woven from the air itself. At first it seems like the distant cry of seabirds, melodic and mournful. But the melody holds, twisting into something sweeter, a thread of music that seems to bypass the ears and speak directly to the blood. It is a song of perfect knowing. It promises to tell each man everything he has ever wanted to understand. The secrets of the world, the meaning of his own life, the fate of those he has lost. The promise is so absolute, so personal, that to hear it and not seek its source feels like a betrayal of the soul. This is the song of the Sirens. Homer describes them as creatures perched on a meadow, strewn with the bones of men who listened and were destroyed. Later tradition would imagine them as half woman, half bird, but in the oldest layers of the story, they are pure voice, pure temptation. They offer not pleasure, but ultimate knowledge, the one thing a weary, lost traveler might crave more than comfort. To resist requires not just strength, but a deliberate abandonment of curiosity. It asks a man to choose ignorance over truth. Odysseus has prepared for this. Following Circe's instructions, he takes a block of beeswax, soft from the sun, and kneads it in his hands. He goes to each crewman one by one and presses the warm wax deep into their ears until the world is reduced to the thump of their own hearts and the sight of their captain's solemn face. They nod, their eyes wide. They will row, and they will see nothing but his signals. Then Odysseus turns to the mast. He has himself tied to it. The ropes are knotted firmly, but not too tight. He must be able to breathe, to command. He instructs the men that no matter how he struggles, how he begs, how he orders them to release him, they must only bind him tighter. He is placing his authority, his very will, into their hands. It is an act of trust more vulnerable than any battle. The ship drifts into the zone of the song. The men bend to their oars, their faces set in concentration, the world silent but for the creak of wood and the slap of oars in water. Odysseus strains against the ropes. His head turns toward the sound. His mouth opens in a silent cry. The men see his eyes, desperate, pleading, commanding them to come closer. They see the veins stand out on his neck. They remember their orders. One of them, perhaps Eurylochus, gives a grim nod, and they pull harder on the oars, their muscles burning, their gazes fixed on the horizon beyond their captain's tortured form. They are saving him from himself. It is a terrible, necessary mutiny. And then, as suddenly as it began, the song fades. The spell breaks. The men, seeing the change in Odysseus's face, the collapse of tension, the return of awareness, slow their stroke. They remove the wax from their ears. The world floods back in. The sigh of the sea, the cry of a gull. They are past. They have survived the Sirens not by fighting a monster, but by surrendering to a plan, by accepting a temporary deafness. For Odysseus, the experience is different. He has heard the song and lived. He carries its haunting melody with him, a secret knowledge of what was offered and refused. Perhaps that is the true test, to know what you have denied yourself, and to sail on anyway. But there is no time for relief. Circe's second warning now rises before them, not as sound, but as a low, thunderous growl from the earth itself. The sea begins to churn. To their left, a sheer rock cliff rises, impossibly smooth and dark, vanishing into a low-hanging mist. From its side, a second lower crag juts out, and between them, the water is convulsing. It is not a wave, but a whirlpool, a spinning mouth of the sea that sucks down everything in a wide, roaring circle. This is Charybdis. 3 times a day, Homer says, she swallows the sea, and 3 times a day she vomits it back up. The rhythm is predictable, but the force is absolute. No ship caught in that vortex could possibly survive. As the men stare, paralyzed at the maelstrom, their eyes are drawn to the cliff opposite. The rock there is not smooth. It is pocked with dark caves, and from one of the highest caves, something moves. A long, sinuous neck, mottled like weathered stone, uncoils. Then another and another. 6 heads emerge, each ending in a gaping mouth lined with 3 rows of teeth like shards of black flint. The necks sway, independent of each other, searching the air. This is Scylla. She is not a monster who chases you. She waits. Her body, Circe said, is rooted in the cave. She can only strike what comes within the reach of those 6 terrible necks, a reach that extends precisely across the narrowest, deepest part of the channel, the only possible path past Charybdis. Odysseus faces the first truly impossible decision of his voyage. He cannot fight Scylla. He cannot outrun Charybdis. He must choose which danger to approach, and in doing so, choose which losses to accept. Circe was brutally clear: steer close to Scylla's cliff, lose 6 men quickly to her jaws. It is a sacrifice, a transaction. The rest will live. To hesitate, to try for the wider channel and risk Charybdis, is to risk everything. The math is cold. The logic of leadership is merciless. He puts on his armor, not to fight, but to stand at the prow, visible. He takes 2 spears, though he knows they are useless. He tells the men nothing of Scylla. Why? Homer does not say, but the reason feels human, tragic. Perhaps he fears panic would doom them all to Charybdis. Perhaps he cannot bear to say aloud that he is leading 6 of them to a death he cannot prevent. He simply orders the helmsman to steer hard for the cliff, to avoid the whirlpool at all costs. The men, seeing their captain armed and resolute at the bow, obey. They pull with all their strength, aiming for the shadow of the towering rock. The ship enters the narrows. The sound of Charybdis fades to a distant roar. replaced by the echoing slap of water against stone. The air grows cold in the shadow of the cliff. Odysseus scans the rock face, his spears ready, a futile gesture of defiance. He does not see her strike. One moment the ship is gliding forward, the next it is chaos. 6 heads dart down like serpents. There is no battle, no struggle. 6 men, the strongest rowers perhaps, those nearest the gunwales, are plucked from their benches. For an instant, Odysseus hears their cries, cut short. He sees their legs kicking in the air as they are lifted. He turns, a spear raised, but the heads are already withdrawing, vanishing into the high cave, the men still screaming, their voices growing faint as they are drawn into the dark. The whole event is over in the space of a few heartbeats. The ship sails on, suddenly lighter, silent but for the frantic pulling of the survivors. Odysseus has done exactly what Circe advised. He has made the correct strategic choice. He has saved the ship and most of his crew, and it feels like utter failure. The faces of the lost men hang in the air. Their empty places at the oars are a more profound accusation than any monster's roar. This is the cost of cunning, the bitter wage of the survivor. He chose the lesser evil, and the evil has taken its payment in full view. There is no trick, no clever word that can undo it. Later tradition would try to map this nightmare onto the real geography of the Mediterranean. Ancient geographers like Strabo, writing centuries after Homer, looked at the dangerous Strait of Messina between Italy and Sicily and saw the perfect match. There, fierce tidal currents could swallow small boats, a possible inspiration for Charybdis. And on the rocky Sicilian shore, strange rock formations or perhaps sightings of large octopuses or seals might have fueled tales of a many-headed beast. The identification is speculative, but it speaks to a human impulse to anchor terrifying stories in real, navigable dangers. For ancient sailors, these passages were not just myths. They were amplifications of the very real perils of wind, rock, and current that could end a voyage in an instant. The ship emerges from the strait into open water again. The sun seems too bright. The sea is treacherously calm. The men collapse over their oars, not in relief, but in a numb exhaustion. They have passed the climax of their trials, the place of the impossible choice. They are alive, but the victory is hollow, stained with the specific personal loss of 6 companions. Odysseus stares back at the receding cliffs, now silent and innocent-looking in the distance. He has learned a new lesson, that some perils cannot be outwitted, only endured, and that the memory of who you sacrifice to pass them may be the heaviest cargo you carry home. Ahead, visible on the horizon, lies another island. This one is low and green, and from it comes the distant, comforting sound of cattle lowing. The men lift their heads. After the terror of the cliffs, the pastoral sight is like a balm. It is the island of the sun, the home of the sacred cattle of Helios, and as they look toward it, their hunger, a physical, gnawing thing after their ordeal, becomes all they can think of. Odysseus remembers the warnings, from Tiresias in the Underworld, from Circe on her island. Do not touch the cattle, he knows the cost, but he also hears the empty groans of his men's stomachs, and he sees the desperate hope in their eyes as they gaze at the green shore. The next test is already beginning, and it will not come from a monster, but from human frailty, from the simple, overwhelming need to eat. The single ship drifts now, a battered thing of weary wood and exhausted men. The air is still, unnaturally so, as if the world itself is holding its breath after the violence of the strait. The deck is slick with seawater and blood, a grim tally of the 6 men lost to Scylla's grasp. The survivors move slowly, their faces hollow with a fatigue that goes deeper than muscle. They have passed through the worst the sea could conjure, yet their journey is not over. Ahead lies an island, its silhouette low and green against the western sky. It looks peaceful, a sanctuary. Odysseus knows it is not. This is Thrinacia, the sacred island of the sun god Helios. Circe had warned of it, and in the underworld, the blind prophet Tiresias had repeated the warning with terrible clarity. The cattle grazing there belong to a god. They must not be touched. To harm them is to invite a final, shattering doom. Odysseus repeats this prohibition to his men as they approach the shore, his voice firm against the sound of the waves. They nod, their eyes fixed on the beach, but he can see the calculation behind their gaze. Their stores are nearly empty. The amphorae of water and wine, the sacks of grain and dried meat plundered from Circe's stores, all are running low. Hunger is a more immediate monster than any they have faced. They beach the ship on a stretch of white sand, far from the inland meadows where the sacred herds roam. For a month, the Etesian winds blow steadily from the north, trapping them. It is a strange, suspended time. The men fish, but the catch is meager. They forage for berries and roots along the shore, but their bellies remain empty. The lowing of the cattle carries down to them on the breeze, a constant, maddening reminder of plenty just out of reach. The herds are magnificent, Homer tells us. 7 herds of cattle and 7 flocks of sheep, 50 beasts to each, tended by the gods' immortal daughters. They graze in sun-drenched pastures, their hides gleaming, their flesh the promise of 100 feasts. Day after day, the men watch Odysseus climb to a high point, scanning the horizon for a break in the wind. Day after day, he returns with the same news. The sea is impassable. The tension aboard the cramped vessel tightens like a drawn bowstring. One evening, while Odysseus has walked further down the coast in search of a better vantage, the crew's resolve snaps. Eurylochus, the same man who once urged caution at Circe's palace, now stands and gives voice to the despair gnawing at them all. He speaks of a cruel choice, a slow death by starvation, or a quick one by the sea if they attempt to sail. But if they slaughter the finest of the cattle, he argues, and make a solemn sacrifice to the gods, perhaps Helios will forgive them. If not, better to drown with full bellies than to waste away here, forgotten. It is a desperate logic, born of exhaustion and the primal fear of an empty stomach. The others agree. They choose the fattest cows from the nearest herd, driving them down to the shore. They try to follow the proper rituals, building an altar of stones and offering prayers, but they have no barley to sprinkle, no wine to pour as libation. They use oak leaves instead, a hollow substitution. Then they cut the animals' throats. The smell of roasting meat, forbidden and rich, fills the cove. When Odysseus returns, he knows at once. The scent tells him, and the sight of his men gathered guiltily around the fires confirms it. The horror that washes over him is colder than any sea. He hears the lowing of the disturbed herds, a sound that now seems like a dirge. For 6 days the men feast, trying to ignore the signs, the hides of the slaughtered cattle crawling across the ground, the meat bellowing on the spits. These are the supernatural portents Homer weaves into the scene, markers of a transgression so profound it violates the natural order. On the 7th day, the wind shifts. They board the ship and set sail, a heavy silence among them. They do not get far. Once they are out of sight of land, a black cloud gathers with unnatural speed. A storm descends, not of wind and rain, but of divine fury. Zeus, answering the call of the offended Helios, hurls a thunderbolt that strikes the ship squarely amidships. The sound is the end of the world. The mast explodes into splinters. The hull shatters like pottery. Every man is thrown into the raging sea, their bodies broken by the falling timbers. Odysseus alone survives, clinging to the mast and keel, which remain lashed together by oxhide ropes. He watches his companions, the last of his fleet, the men who sacked Troy with him, disappear beneath the waves. Their final mistake has consumed them. The episode is stark in its moral clarity. Here, the danger is not a monster or a sorceress, but a broken oath and a violated taboo. The crew's action is a direct assault on the sacred order, the themis that governs the relationship between gods and men. Archaeology cannot confirm a specific event, but it affirms the cultural reality behind the story. Mycenaean Linear B tablets from Pylos record meticulous inventories of sacred herds belonging to the gods, their numbers guarded by divine sanction. The violation of such property was not mere theft. It was a cosmic crime, an affront that demanded absolute retribution. The crew, in their hunger, choose mortal need over divine law, and the price is annihilation. Clutching his makeshift raft, Odysseus is driven back through the very strait he had barely survived. He sees Charybdis, the whirlpool, sucking down the wreckage of his ship in its monstrous gullet. He barely escapes being swallowed himself, grabbing onto the overhanging fig tree just in time and holding on until the maelstrom vomits his raft back up. Exhausted, alone, he drifts for 9 days on the open sea, a speck against the vastness. The voyage that began with 12 ships and hundreds of men ends with one man clinging to splinters. All his cunning, all his endurance has led him here, utterly alone, his mission in ruins, his home further away than ever. The winds and currents finally cast him upon a new shore, a place of immense, lonely beauty. It is the island of Ogygia, and here he will meet the nymph who holds him captive not for days, but for years, Calypso, whose name means the concealer. The sea has taken everything from him. Now it offers only the prison of forgetfulness. The sea that took him is not the same sea that releases him. For 9 days, Odysseus clings to the broken mast of his shattered ship, a piece of driftwood in a world of water. The sun burns him. The salt crusts his skin. The waves, indifferent as mountains, lift him and drop him without pattern. He has no crew to command, no oars to pull, no plan to devise. There is only the raw, animal work of breathing, of holding on, of not letting go. When the 10th dawn breaks, it finds him washed ashore on a beach of white sand, so fine it whispers under the gentle lap of a turquoise lagoon. The air is still and fragrant with cedar and cypress. A stream of clear water cuts through the sand, and birds sing in a grove of poplars. It is a place of impossible peace. This is Ogygia, the island of the nymph Calypso. She finds him there, half-drowned, salt-caked, and brings him to her cave. Homer describes it in terms that defy mortal longing, a cavern with a high arched roof, sweet with the smell of burning cedar and thyme. Vines heavy with grapes curl around the entrance. 4 springs bubble with clear water, each flowing in a different direction through meadows of soft violet and wild parsley. It is a prison made of every comfort a weary traveller could dream of. Calypso is not a monster. She is not Circe, who transforms and tests. She is a goddess of profound loneliness, and she offers Odysseus the one thing he has been fighting for since he left Troy: an end to suffering. She offers him immortality. She offers him herself. She tells him, with a tenderness that is not deceptive, that if he stays with her, he will never grow old, never know pain or loss again. He can rule this perfect island with her forever. All he has to do is stop wanting Ithaca, and for 7 years he stays. The sources do not allow us to say for certain what Homer intended with this number. In the rhythm of the epic, 7 is a number of completion, of a cycle fulfilled. Later tradition would see it as symbolic, a duration meant to stretch Odysseus's exile to its absolute limit, to test the very core of his identity. For 7 years, the man of constant sorrow and endless cunning lives in a state of suspended animation. He eats ambrosia, he drinks nectar, he sleeps in the bed of a goddess, and every day, as Homer tells us with devastating simplicity, he sits on the shore, looking out over the empty sea, and weeps. This is the emotional nadir of the entire voyage. The storms, the monsters, the loss of his men, these were active tragedies, battles to be fought. Ogygia is a different kind of hell. It is the hell of having everything you thought you wanted, except the one thing you actually need. It is the paradise that annihilates the self. Here, Odysseus is not a king, nor a strategist, nor a leader. He is an object of divine affection, a cherished pet in a gilded cage, the fire that drove him past the Sirens, that calculated the cost of Scylla, that raged against the dying of his crew, that fire is banked to embers. For 7 years, it only smoulders. Calypso's cave, in the logic of the story, is a place outside of time. Archaeologists will never find it, for it exists in the geography of myth, a literary device of the highest order. It represents the ultimate temptation to surrender memory and purpose for eternal comfort. Some scholars have wondered if such tales reflect very ancient sailors' lore about getting island-struck, losing the will to return after too long in some remote, bountiful anchorage. But Ogygia is more than that. It is the story's way of asking what home even means when the journey to it destroys everything you were. The days pass in a gentle, meaningless rhythm. Odysseus helps Calypso tend her garden. He walks the same pristine beaches. He listens to the same 4 springs. The view from the shore never changes. The horizon is a clean, unwavering line. There are no ships. There is no sign that the world of men still exists. Ithaca becomes not a place, but a fading ache, a name he whispers to the waves that cannot carry it anywhere. Then, in the 7th year, the machinery of the gods, which seems to have forgotten him, stirs. Athena, his steadfast if intermittent patron, pleads his case before Zeus. The king of the gods sends Hermes, the messenger, sliding down the rainbow to Ogygia with an order. Calypso must let her mortal go. Homer paints a poignant scene. Hermes finds Calypso at her loom, weaving with a golden shuttle, her beautiful voice filling the cave as she sings. When she hears the command, she is furious, and her complaint is heartbreaking. She accuses the gods of jealousy, of hypocrisy. Why can they take mortal lovers while she must give hers up? But she cannot defy Zeus. She goes to Odysseus on the shore. He is, as usual, weeping. She tells him the news, and his reaction is telling. He does not rejoice immediately. He is wary. He thinks it might be a trick. He asks her to swear a mighty oath that she means him no harm. The man of twists and turns has been softened, made suspicious even of his own salvation. Once the oath is given, however, his old energy returns. In a few days, with her help, he fells trees, builds a raft, and fits it with a mast and sail. Calypso fills a skin with wine, another with water, and gives him a sack of provisions. She even sends a fair wind. On the morning of his departure, she bathes him, dresses him in fragrant clothes, and stands with him on the beach. There is a genuine sorrow in her farewell. She tells him that if he knew the suffering that still awaited him on the sea, he would stay with her and be immortal. But his mind, once again fixed on the horizon, is set. He pushes the raft into the lagoon, catches the wind, and Ogygia begins to shrink behind him, a dream receding into the mist of the sea. For 17 days, he sails unerringly, the stars themselves seeming to guide him. On the 18th day, Poseidon, returning from a feast in Ethiopia, sees him. The god's old wrath reignites. With a blow of his trident, he churns the sea, shatters the raft, and plunges Odysseus back into the fury of the waves. The paradise is gone, the struggle is renewed. Clinging to a single timber, battered by storm, he is once again the man of the sea, fighting simply to survive the next hour, the next breath. The interlude is over. The timeless island has released him back into time, back into pain, back into the current of his destiny. He is alone, but he is moving. The memory of the cave, of the soft meadows and the singing nymph will become just another story, another scar. Ahead, still invisible beyond the storm's rage, lies another shore, and the people who will finally hear his name and carry him home. The raft holds for 2 days. On the third, Poseidon returns. The god sees his quarry from a distance, a speck on the sea he thought he had broken. A storm gathers with a speed that feels personal. The sky bruises from blue to black. The wind does not rise. It arrives, a wall of force that lifts the raft like a toy and smashes it back down. The lashings groan, then snap. The logs scatter. Odysseus is thrown into the water, a cold shock that steals his breath. He clings to a single beam as the sea tries to swallow him whole. For 2 nights and 2 days, the storm batters him until his fingers are raw and his strength is a memory. On the third dawn, the wind dies as suddenly as it came. He sees a line of trees, dark against a pale shore. He swims, his body moving on instinct alone until his knees scrape sand. He crawls from the surf into the mouth of a river, collapses among the reeds, and kisses the earth. When he wakes, it is to the sound of laughter. He opens his eyes to see a young woman and her attendants, their baskets filled with washing, standing at the river's edge. They are dressed in fine, brightly colored fabrics, their hair intricately braided. For a moment he fears another enchantment, another Circe or Calypso, but their faces show only curiosity, not predatory hunger. He is a frightful sight, caked in salt, skin scraped raw, hair matted with seaweed. He rises, breaking a branch to cover himself, and approaches. The young woman is Nausicaa, daughter of King Alcinous. She does not scream. She listens as he speaks, his voice rough from seawater and exhaustion. She offers him food, oil for his wounds, and fresh clothing from her brother's stores. Then she gives him directions to her father's palace and advice. "Walk behind the cart," she says. "Let the townspeople see you following us, but not too closely. There will be talk, but less of it." He does as she instructs. The path leads through orchards and well-tended fields, past men pruning vines and women weaving in courtyards. The city walls, when they appear, are high and well-built, the gates of bronze. He passes through them unseen, a stranger wrapped in the shadow of the princess's cart. The palace of Alcinous stops him in his tracks. Homer describes it with a craftsman's awe. The walls are bronze, the doors gold, the lintels silver. Guard dogs of gold and silver stand eternal watch. Inside, the light is soft, filtered through linen drapes. The air smells of cedar and citrus. Young men polish chariot wheels with oil. Women grind grain on hand mills of stone. In the great hall, 50 serving women weave at looms, their shuttles flying, creating cloth that shimmers like sea foam or sunset. This is not the rough-hewn timber of Ithaca, nor the wild, perfumed grotto of Calypso. This is a civilization in perfect, peaceful operation. The sources do not allow us to say for certain if a place like Scheria, the Phaeacians' home, ever existed. Later tradition would place it on Corfu, an island known for its skilled sailors in antiquity. Some scholars suggest the Phaeacians represent a memory of a real Bronze Age seafaring culture, perhaps the Minoans of Crete, or another advanced maritime society known for their swift ships and isolation. Archaeology shows us cultures that lived by the sea, their wealth built on trade and navigation, their homes adorned with the riches of distant ports. The Phaeacians, in Homer's telling, are the ultimate sailors. Their ships need no rudders. They understand the thoughts of their captains and glide over the waves as swift as a thought or a falcon's dive. For Odysseus, standing in that radiant hall, it must have felt like stepping into a dream of what civilization could be. After the cannibal giants, the seductive sorceress, the crushing whirlpool, and the lonely nymph, here was order, beauty, and law. King Alcinous and Queen Arete receive him without fear. They seat him at the table in the ashes of the hearth, a traditional place for a supplicant. They give him food and wine before asking his name. This is Xenia, the sacred guest friendship performed flawlessly. Archaeology and texts confirm the importance of these rituals in Mycenaean society. To violate them was to invite divine wrath. To honor them was to affirm one's humanity. Here, in this hall of bronze and gold, the custom is not just followed, it is perfected. For days they feast him. They listen to the bard Demodocus sing of the Trojan War, of the quarrel between Achilles and Odysseus. Odysseus weeps, hiding his face in his cloak. Only Alcinous notices. He stops the games, the dancing, the song. He turns to his guest and asks gently who he is. And so Odysseus speaks. He begins with his name. "I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, known to men for my cunning." The hall falls silent. He tells them everything. The Cicones, the Lotus-Eaters, the Cyclops, Aeolus and the Bag of Winds, the Laestrygonians and their crushing stones, Circe and her transformations, the journey to the land of the dead, the Sirens' song, the horror of Scylla, the loss in Charybdis' moor, the fatal hunger on the island of the sun, the long years with Calypso. He speaks through the afternoon and into the evening, his voice weaving the tapestry of his suffering. The Phaeacians listen, captivated. They are a people who love stories, who prize skill in speech as much as skill at sea. When he finishes, there is no debate, no hesitation. Alcinous promises him passage home. They load a ship with gifts, bronze tripods, cauldrons, finely woven cloaks, gold, a king's ransom, compensation for all he has lost. The next evening, under a sky thick with stars, they board the swiftest of their vessels. Odysseus is given a deep, soft bed on the deck, and sleep takes him the moment he lies down. The Phaeacian crew, the best sailors in the world, take up their oars. The ship slides from the harbor, cuts through the calm sea like a blade through silk, and flies toward Ithaca. The journey takes a single night. As dawn breaks, pale and grey, they reach the familiar harbor. They carry the sleeping Odysseus ashore, placing him gently on the sand beneath an olive tree. They pile the gifts beside him, then turn their ship and depart. Before they can reach their own shores, Poseidon sees them. Enraged that they helped his enemy, he strikes. As their ship nears Scheria, he turns it to stone, rooted forever in the harbor mouth, a warning to any who would defy the gods. On the beach, Odysseus wakes to the sound of receding waves. He does not recognize his own home. The sea that had carried Odysseus through storms, monsters, and the whims of gods finally brought him home in silence. He did not know it. While he slept aboard the swift ship of the Phaeacians, its skilled sailors guided their vessel across calm waters beneath a moonlit sky. They asked no reward beyond the promise already given, for King Alcinous had declared that no guest should leave his kingdom without every courtesy owed by sacred hospitality. As dawn approached, the dark outline of Ithaca rose from the sea. The sailors carried the sleeping hero gently onto the shore. Beside him, they placed the gifts he had received: bronze, finely woven cloth, gold, and precious vessels. treasures meant to restore something of the fortune he had lost during 20 years of absence. Then, without waking him, they quietly pushed their ship back into the sea. By the time Odysseus opened his eyes, they were already disappearing beyond the horizon. For a long moment, he simply looked around him. Rocky hills, olive trees, a narrow bay embraced by familiar cliffs, yet nothing seemed familiar. The years had altered both the island and the man who now stood upon it. His memories belonged to a younger king who had departed for Troy 2 decades earlier. The homeland before him seemed almost like another country. Had the Phaeacians deceived him? Had the gods carried him somewhere else entirely? Confusion slowly gave way to suspicion. Only then did another traveler appear along the path, a young shepherd, calm and self-assured, carrying no sign of fear despite the stranger before her. It was Athena, disguised once again. Smiling gently, she listened as Odysseus cautiously invented yet another false identity to conceal his true name. The goddess laughed. Even now, standing upon his own homeland, he could not resist testing another person's intentions before revealing himself. In that habit, she recognized the very quality she admired most. Not strength, not courage, but intelligence tempered by patience. Dropping her disguise, Athena revealed herself in divine radiance. The morning light seemed to brighten around her as the familiar landscape finally became clear. "This is Ithaca," she told him, "your home." Only then did Odysseus kneel and kiss the ground. For years he had dreamed of this moment, yet there could be no celebration. His kingdom was no longer truly his. While he had wandered across the seas, more than 100 noblemen had occupied his palace, consuming his wealth, pressuring Penelope to choose a new husband, and believing their absent king would never return. Home had become enemy territory. Athena explained everything. Penelope still resisted every proposal. Telemachus had grown into adulthood but lived under constant threat. The suitors grew bolder with each passing month, convinced that power already belonged to them. Returning home, Odysseus realized, would require every bit as much caution as surviving the Cyclops or escaping Scylla. A reckless king would die before sunset. A patient one might reclaim everything. The goddess raised her hand. The transformation came without pain, yet it altered every detail of his appearance. His broad shoulders stooped. His skin became weathered and lined. His bright hair faded into grey. His royal clothing became coarse rags worn by an aging beggar. The king of Ithaca vanished. In his place stood an old wanderer whom few would notice and even fewer would fear. The disguise served a deeper purpose than simple concealment. Throughout his journey, Odysseus had repeatedly survived by abandoning appearances. Before Polyphemus, he became nobody. Before foreign kings, he claimed invented identities. Now, after 20 years away, he would once again win his kingdom not through recognition, but through anonymity. Only those truly loyal would see beyond appearances. Athena directed him toward the humble farmstead of Eumaeus, the royal swineherd. Among all the servants remaining in Ithaca, none had remained more faithful. As Odysseus approached the farm, barking dogs rushed toward the unfamiliar beggar. Before they could attack, Eumaeus drove them back with practiced authority. The old servant welcomed the stranger without hesitation. He offered bread, wine, a place beside the fire. In the ancient Greek world, hospitality remained a sacred obligation protected by Zeus himself. A traveler might be poor, unknown or dangerous, yet he was still owed food and shelter before questions were asked. Eumaeus followed that tradition without knowing he was serving the very king whose estate he had protected for 2 decades. Odysseus watched quietly. He listened as the swineherd spoke of his absent master, not as a forgotten ruler, but as though he still lived. "My lord will return." The words carried no certainty, only hope. Years of disappointment had given Eumaeus every reason to surrender that belief, yet loyalty had become stronger than evidence. Odysseus lowered his eyes. Of all the welcomes he had imagined during 20 years of longing, perhaps none touched him more deeply than this simple hut, where a faithful servant still refused to abandon the memory of his king. For the first time since reaching Ithaca, he no longer felt entirely alone. Still disguised as a beggar, Odysseus did what he had done across the whole of his voyage. He lied, not out of cruelty, but out of caution. He told Eumaeus a false tale of distant lands, shipwrecks, and wandering. He claimed to have heard news of Odysseus, suggesting that the lost king might yet return. The swineherd wanted to believe him, yet years of false rumors had made him careful. Hope, after all, can become painful when it has been betrayed too many times. Outside, the island continued its quiet rhythm. Swine rooted in the earth, smoke drifted from the hut. Far away in the palace, the suitors continued feasting, unaware that the man they had declared dead had already reached Ithaca's shore. Then another figure arrived, Telemachus. The son Odysseus had left behind as an infant now entered the hut as a grown man. He had just returned from his own dangerous journey, seeking news of the father he had never truly known. He carried himself with new confidence, but youth still clung to him. He was not yet the king his father had been, but no longer the helpless child the suitors expected him to remain. Eumaeus rejoiced at his return and hurried to carry news of it to Penelope. For the first time, father and son were left alone. Athena appeared. The moment had come. With a touch from the goddess, the beggar's rags seemed to fall away from meaning itself. The bent back straightened, the greyed hair darkened, the worn face recovered something of its old authority. Before Telemachus stood not a beggar, but a man bearing the unmistakable presence of command. At first, the young prince stepped back in fear. No mortal, he thought, could change so suddenly. "You must be a god." Odysseus answered with the truth he had carried across every sea. "I am your father." For nearly 20 years, Telemachus had imagined this moment. Sometimes he must have pictured a warrior in bronze returning with ships and banners. Sometimes an aging king stepping through the palace doors. Sometimes only a ghost that would never come at all. Instead, he found a weathered man whose eyes carried memories older than Telemachus himself. For a moment, neither father nor son spoke. Words could not recover 20 stolen years. Only silence could. Then Odysseus opened his arms. Telemachus broke. They wept together, king and prince, father and son, two strangers bound by blood and absence. Homer compares their cries to birds whose young have been stolen from the nest. It is one of the most piercing images in the epic because the reunion is not triumphant, it is wounded. They have found each other, but they have also discovered everything they lost. When the tears finally quieted, strategy returned. The palace was filled with enemies. The suitors were many, armed, arrogant, and accustomed to ruling the household through numbers and intimidation. Odysseus and Telemachus could not defeat them by open challenge alone. They would need patience. They would need secrecy. They would need the old skills of Troy brought home to Ithaca. Father and son planned together in the dim light of the swineherd's hut. Telemachus would return to the palace first and hide the weapons from the hall. Odysseus would follow later in his beggar's disguise, observing every man who insulted him, every servant who betrayed him, every loyal heart that remained. It would be a test of the entire household. The return to Ithaca, then, was not a simple homecoming. It was an infiltration. The hero who had survived giants, witches, storms, and the dead now faced something more intimate and perhaps more painful, walking through his own land as a stranger. In this final movement of the poem, the world of myth draws close to the world of social reality. The palace is no longer just a building. It is a political center, an economic storehouse, a sacred household, and the fragile symbol of order on a small island kingdom. To reclaim it, Odysseus must do more than punish trespassers. He must discover who still remembers justice when power appears to belong to someone else. As evening settled over Ithaca, Athena restored the disguise. The king became a beggar once more. Odysseus took up his staff and followed the path toward the palace, past fields and stones that should have welcomed him, past trees that had continued growing while he wandered the sea. Ahead waited Penelope. Ahead waited the suitors. Ahead waited the bow that no other man could bend. The voyage across the sea was over. The journey through his own house was about to begin. Morning broke over Ithaca with deceptive calm. Within the palace, the suitors gathered once again for another day of feasting. Servants carried bread and wine through the great hall, while laughter echoed beneath the smoke-darkened rafters. The men who filled the room believed themselves masters of the household now. For years they had consumed Odysseus's livestock, emptied his storerooms, and competed openly for the hand of Penelope, each convinced that the absent king would never again walk through these doors. Only one among them sensed that something had changed. Penelope. Though no messenger had brought news, though no witness had reported a ship arriving in secret, she felt the strange unease that often accompanies the turning of fate. 20 years of waiting had taught her patience, but it had also sharpened instincts that reason could not always explain. That morning she made a decision. If none of the suitors could be persuaded to leave, then one final trial would decide the matter. She descended into the storeroom where the treasures of Odysseus still rested untouched. There, carefully wrapped and preserved through 2 decades of absence, lay a weapon unlike any other in Greece. Odysseus' great bow. It was not merely a weapon, it was a symbol of kingship. According to Homer, few men possessed the strength even to string it, let alone draw it. The bow had become almost an extension of the man who once carried it. Penelope ordered it brought into the hall. The conversations ceased. Servants laid 12 axe heads in a perfectly straight line across the floor, each one pierced through its center with a narrow opening. The challenge was simple to describe and nearly impossible to achieve. Whoever could string the bow and send a single arrow cleanly through all 12 axe heads would become her husband. One after another, the suitors stepped forward. The strongest tried first. They pulled until their hands trembled. Some warmed the wood before the fire. Others rubbed the bow with oil, hoping to soften its ancient limbs. Still, it refused to bend. The hall that had so often echoed with boasting gradually fell silent. The bow seemed almost alive, resisting every hand that sought to claim what did not belong to it. Among the gathered nobles, only one man watched without impatience, the old beggar. Dust still clung to his worn cloak. His walking staff rested quietly beside him. To every eye in the hall, he appeared exactly what he claimed to be, an aging wanderer seeking nothing more than food and shelter. Only Telemachus knew otherwise. Across the room, father and son exchanged the briefest glance. The time had come. As another suitor failed, Odysseus rose slowly from his seat. "If it pleases the queen," he said calmly, "allow me to test the bow as well." The request was met with immediate laughter. Some mocked his ragged clothing. Others questioned whether old age had stolen not only his strength but also his judgment. What could a beggar accomplish where princes had failed? Even Penelope hesitated, not because she feared he would succeed, but because she feared what the suitors might do to him if they considered the request an insult. Before she could answer, Telemachus spoke firmly. "The guest has asked fairly. Let him try." Reluctantly, the bow was placed into the stranger's hands. The laughter continued. Odysseus ignored every voice. He turned the bow slowly, studying its polished wood as though greeting an old companion after many years apart. His fingers moved with quiet familiarity, testing the grain, the curve, the balance that memory had never forgotten. Then, with effortless precision, he strung it. The sound was soft, a single clear note, like the string of a finely tuned lyre. Silence swept across the hall. Every face changed. No man had managed even the first step. The beggar had done it as though no 20 years had passed. Without another word, Odysseus fitted an arrow to the string. He drew. The bow bent smoothly beneath his hands. The arrow flew. It passed cleanly through every one of the 12 axe heads before striking the far wall with a sharp crack. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the beggar spoke. "My contest is finished." His voice no longer belonged to an old wanderer. It carried the calm authority of a king. At that same moment, Telemachus quietly lifted the spear he had hidden nearby. The palace doors were secured. The escape routes were gone. The hunters had become the trapped. Odysseus turned next toward Antinous. The most arrogant of the suitors was raising a golden cup to his lips, still struggling to understand what had just happened. He had mocked the beggar, abused the household, and treated the palace of another man as though it were already his own. He never reached for a weapon. Odysseus released the arrow. It struck Antinous in the throat. The cup fell from his hand, wine spilling across the floor before mingling with blood. The hall erupted. At first, the suitors thought it must be an accident. Then they saw the bow in Odysseus's hands, the spear in Telemachus' grip, and the locked doors behind them. The truth arrived too late. The king of Ithaca had returned. Eurymachus, sensing disaster, tried to bargain. He blamed Antinous for every crime and promised repayment for the cattle, wine, and treasure consumed over the years. But Odysseus had crossed too many seas to be deceived by words offered only after defeat became certain. This was not a dispute over property. It was the reckoning of an entire household. The suitors had violated hospitality, plotted against Telemachus, pressured Penelope, and treated the absence of a king as permission to seize his world piece by piece. No payment could undo that. The battle became sudden and brutal. Odysseus used the bow first, each arrow finding its mark before the suitors could organize themselves. Telemachus brought weapons from the storeroom for his father and the loyal servants who stood beside them. Spears flashed in the firelight, tables overturned. Bronze struck wood and stone. Men who had once lounged across the hall in careless luxury now scrambled through spilled wine and broken dishes, searching for weapons that were no longer within reach. The violence is difficult for modern readers. Homer does not soften it. But within the moral world of the poem, the slaughter is not presented as random cruelty. It is the restoration of order after years of corruption. The suitors are punished not simply because they desired Penelope, but because they violated the sacred duties that held society together: guest friendship, restraint, loyalty, respect for a household, and the protection owed to the vulnerable. The hall that had been polluted by arrogance must be cleansed by judgment. One by one, the suitors fall. The laughter that had filled the palace for years is replaced by silence. When the final body lies still, Odysseus does not celebrate. He orders the hall cleaned, the dead are removed, the floor is washed. Smoke and sulfur purify the room where sacred order had been broken for so long. Only after the house has been cleansed can its deepest wound be faced, Penelope. She has heard that the stranger is Odysseus. But hearing is not the same as believing. For 20 years, she has guarded herself against false hope. Travelers have brought rumors, dreamers have offered promises. The world has repeatedly suggested that her husband might return, only to leave her waiting again. So when she descends into the hall and sees the man before her, she does not run into his arms. She studies him. The face is older, the body is worn. The eyes are familiar and unfamiliar at once. Odysseus, who has survived every trial of the sea, must now endure one final test at home. Penelope turns to a servant and gives a quiet command. "Move the marriage bed." The words strike Odysseus harder than any spear. That bed cannot be moved. He knows because he built it himself, long ago, before the war, before Troy, before the wandering began. One of its posts was carved from the living trunk of an olive tree rooted deep in the earth. Around that tree he shaped the bedchamber itself. It was not simply furniture. It was the secret foundation of their marriage, a truth known only to husband and wife. In sudden anguish, he describes it. The olive trunk, the careful carving, the chamber built around it, the impossible immovability of the bed. And there, at last, Penelope knows. No stranger could know this. No impostor could invent it. The man before her is not merely a survivor returned from war. He is the one person who remembers the hidden center of their life together. Only then does she weep. Only then does she cross the distance between them. The reunion of Odysseus and Penelope is not simple happiness. Too much time has passed for that. It is relief mixed with grief, recognition mixed with disbelief, love returning through the ruins of 20 years. They have both survived by cunning, Odysseus across the sea, Penelope within the house. And now, at the end of all disguises, they recognize each other not by appearance, but by memory. The Odyssey could have ended with a throne reclaimed or enemies defeated. Instead, its deepest closure comes through a bed rooted in the earth. A home is not only walls, wealth, or power. It is the shared knowledge no one else can steal. In historical terms, the world beneath this scene belongs to the late Bronze Age imagination. Warrior households, fragile kingships, sacred hospitality, stored wealth, and violent reckonings in halls where political authority was intensely personal. Archaeology cannot prove that Odysseus stood in such a room, or that a bow contest ever decided a queen's fate. But it can show us the kind of world in which such a story made emotional sense. The poem leaves us with something more enduring than proof. A man may cross the sea. He may fight monsters. He may lose ships, companions, years, and almost himself. But the final question is quieter. Can he still be known? For Odysseus, the answer comes not from glory, but from recognition. At last, after every false name, every disguise, every storm, and every uncertain shore, he is no longer nobody. He is Odysseus once more. He is home. For nearly 3,000 years, the Odyssey has endured not because it tells us exactly what happened, but because it understands something timeless about being human. Whether Odysseus was once a real Bronze Age king whose memories slowly transformed into legend, or whether he was always a creation of extraordinary storytellers, we may never know with certainty. Archaeology reveals the world that shaped the poem, while Homer gives that world a soul. Perhaps that is why this story continues to speak to us. Most of us will never battle a Cyclops, resist the Sirens, or sail beneath the anger of the gods. Yet almost everyone knows what it is like to lose their way, to search for home, to endure hardship, and to hope that after everything has changed, someone will still be waiting for us. The journey of Odysseus reminds us that home is more than a destination. It is memory. It is loyalty. It is the people who still know who we are, even after the longest of journeys. Thank you for spending part of your evening here with us. If you enjoyed this voyage through history and legend, I'd be delighted to welcome you back for another. Until then, may your nights be peaceful, your curiosity never fade, and your own lantern always guide you safely home. Take care now.